Well, thank you for coming. These are great and exciting times. We have a few little items, a couple items that we would like to direct you to. We need to vote on a couple things as a membership group that are here. We need to vote on a couple items that our general counsel will be discussing a little bit. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Larry Hilton, who is our general counsel, and he'll explain those.
So what we have today is the opportunity to re-elect some of our board members. We have several that are going to term out without our election here. So, and those are, hey Dave, okay, if you could stand, if you were in the original group of board members in 2014. Gerald? Okay. So we have, yeah, Todd? Okay. No? Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 directors who are up for re-election. And then we have one more who has been nominated. It's one of our very active members from Nevada. Mr. Vollmer, he has been involved working with legislators down there, trying to push sound money legislation. I think he'd be a great addition to the board. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 directors, 5 returning, 1 additional. All in favor? Do you want to give some speeches, or? These guys have been serving, you know. Are you willing to continue?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I'm wondering about,
Merlin Weeks, or?
Merlin Weeks.
Yeah, I
He
think.
called and asked to be excused.
Okay, so he wanted to be here. Okay, so we will put Merlin on the roster as well. So with that,
Do we need to include any board members that will be on a call later today on the board of directors meetings? That would.
yes.
When are we having that call?
So that will be just right after this speech here. So, I guess the way that we'd like to put it is we've had excellent members of the board who have been very involved. We've had some members of the board who haven't been as involved, and they're and based on our discussions, I think they're going to be just going ahead and let their seats go. So what I'd like to suggest is that we re-elect those members of the board that would have termed out today, that participate in today's meeting. So we're having a board meeting after this. So everybody that shows up for the meeting that has been on the board for 3 years and wants to continue, what I'd like to propose is that they do continue. And I'll put that forth. Do I have a second for that motion? Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. We also have a bylaw change that we'd like to consider. And this comes from when we had originally started down this path. We had envisioned governmental members, individuals and businesses, and the other was charities. And so, I'm just going to turn this down just a little bit. There we go. And I think that's a little bit better. And so, reaching out to governmental entities, we looked at the laws in the state of Utah, and we found that governmental entities could hold money market mutual funds. So we characterized our shares of capital credits as money market mutual fund shares, because we thought, well, you know, it seems to fit. But we subsequently, as a couple of our board members know, had a meeting with the Utah Money Management Council, and they have nixed the idea of our proceeding on that basis. So we're going to have to look to our legislators to introduce legislation that will allow governments to hold legal tender, because our workaround didn't really work. And so, you know, some of the criticism was that we don't pay interest on, you know, so how can it be a money market mutual fund if it isn't fractionally reserved? If you have 100% reserve in cash, that doesn't qualify as a money market mutual fund. You got to be diversified and take on risk. for it to be a money market mutual fund. So anyway, what the ownership shares in the UPMA are really capital credits, and so we want to just go back to that original terminology. So we just want to go through the bylaws and change those references. Are there any questions on that? Okay, I'll call, yes.
Is that a fiat currency?
A money market mutual fund. That's the problem, is they think of it in terms of a fiat currency. They can't imagine a gold or silver, money market mutual fund. So, yes.
Just a question, so before it was classified as the money that we have, the gold or silver holdings that we have, are part of a gold or silver mutual fund, and the gains on those funds were not to be taxable because it's actual money.
Right.
So will this change affect that?
Yeah, this should actually, we have actually I'm general counsel, this is our special counsel for UPMA, and he is a tax controversy specialist. So I'm going to let him actually respond to that question.
This
Like an ice
Looks like an ice cream. I'm not gonna look at it. I'm not gonna look at it. This change actually has no tax consequences. This is just a clarification that the other name didn't fit. They tried to make it fit cosmetically so that municipalities would feel safe with safer money. Apparently the rules don't let them feel safe with safer money. They need to use actual speculative investments in order to qualify as safe. So this has no effect on the tax ramifications. It is just a relabeling and realigning with what a cooperative has. When members are members of a cooperative, which this is, you have credits that reflects your percentage of capital, the capital of the cooperative, and that's all this is.
Okay. Let's see, any other questions on this proposed bylaw change? Okay, so do we have a motion to adopt this change? Okay, very good. And a second?
Second.
Okay, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay, this is our final bit of business. That is that we have, at a few of our board meetings, we haven't actually been able to muster a quorum. We've been short by one or two. Usually we have somewhere between a dozen and 20 show up, but to hit a quorum, because our bylaws are set up so that we can have a very large board. We can get up to 60 members of our board. And so I think this is just going to be more and more of a challenge because we'll be pulling people from across the country and so forth. So an idea that I discussed with our chairman is the possibility of actually having our board, a quorum, consist of half the members or 9 members, whichever is less. So that would allow, if the board, if we decide that we want the board to kind of shrink that back down, then it's the half the member thing that would apply. But at least we'd have 9. It's good enough for the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm thinking maybe that would be good enough for us. So I don't know, Abe, if you want to speak to that at all about the quorum issue and some of the problems we've had with that.
Yeah, I think as we're now growing, we're off to the races, if you will. I think we need to have an active board so that we can make decisions quickly and move forward. And so I've seen we've at least had at least 9 people from the board of directors active, either calling in or participating. And so it's an uneven number, so that there should be able to break a tie with that number. We have, how many board of director meetings, people do we have present here? I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 7 here, so we'll at least have 9. No, so there's 8. So we'll have at least 9 here. We'll have 8 here physically, and we'll have at least a few people calling in. So, So does anybody have any questions about that, or or any feedback on that, or even another proposal?
We can make it a smaller number if you want it, just to make sure we have a quorum today. We can go 7,
I think we can get another person to call, but I think I like 9,
9.
at least 9.
Yeah.
I would think maybe 9, between 9 and 12, but if since we're still small right now.
Is this a bylaws
Bylaw change.
change?
So it has to be done in the hearing on members meeting.
I move that we modify the bylaws as advised.
Okay.
Look, just
Second.
point of information, have we established a quorum already to be making the changes in the votes
Yes,
that we're doing?
I think we
Have we?
took a head count.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of that change, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is passed, and we will change those in our bylaw.
Representative Mark Fincham is a rock star of legal tender legislation. You've run how many? Well, I mean, let's just go through some of the credentials here. You've run how many legal tender or specie bills? I want to say probably 3.
Over a period of quite a few years.
Over a period of quite a few years. You know, and as we talked, he just dogged determination. They say no, and he comes back, and maybe we'll hear a little bit.
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, thanks to his efforts, Arizona has joined the ranks of sound money states. The other thing that he did that was, I think, just brilliant is he convened a gold bond commission that studied the feasibility of the state of Arizona using gold bonds to retire state debt. And the work that came out of that, I think, was has the potential of shaping fiscal policy, not monetary policy, but fiscal policy for states. In other words, kind of righting the ship, reducing debt, I think, for kind of a new age. You know, if we really adopt this, I think that perhaps the days of, you know, deep sovereign debt would be numbered. So I really appreciate his willingness to come and join us today. I think that you'll find his remarks to be very insightful and inspiring. And so with that, I ask you to give a nice round of applause to Representative.
Larry. So I thank you very much, Larry, and I appreciate the graciousness of you and your wife for transportation and lodging, and I'm humbled by the opportunity to be invited to come up and speak to y'all today. Greetings from Oro Valley, Arizona. That would be, and I don't know how that happened. That's just how that's where I ended up when I moved from Michigan. So, gosh. Maybe there's a little bit of predestiny there. I'm not sure. And by the way, I'm glad you brought up no. No 3 times from your daughter means not now, okay. Yeah, so anybody who has a daughter knows exactly what I'm talking about. The daughters seem to figure out, okay, not right now, but that means he's still going to be open to another day. So I first want to say that, and I hadn't intended to say anything about this, but I feel obligated to. Have any of you received a copy of this unsolicited in the mail? Good. Then I'll throw it in the trash where it belongs. It is a book written by a fellow by the name of Charles King, which, quite frankly, I had my good friend Mr. Joe Cobb, who, by the way, was on our Gold Bond Study Commission. Joe was a financial policy wonk for the Reagan administration. Dealt directly, had a hand in the passage of the 50-unit dollar. He always confuses me, quite frankly. This guy knows more about money than you could ever imagine exists. So with that, I'll get into my remarks. We get a glimpse of the magnitude of honest money problem when we face today's world of monetary stuff, if you will. There is no better word for it because it's this milieu of things. When we look in the rearview mirror to President James Garfield, now I'm a history guy, so I love to dive into facts and context of the day and some of the things that are there. Garfield was president in 1881, expressed the problem of currency and unity thusly. Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. Okay, that seems reasonably true. And when you realize the entire system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few very powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate. So within weeks of the president making this outlandish statement, he was assassinated. That could be a coincidence, but he called into question some pretty massive powers that had a lot at stake. A fellow by the name of Cleon Susskind in his book, The Naked Capitalist, wrote, "Power from any source tends to create an appetite for additional power. It's like a drug. And if you don't believe me, take a look at Washington, D.C. right now. The people that occupy space in the District of Columbia, are obsessed with one thing, and that's re-election. They don't really care what you have to say. I mean, sure, they'll come and pay platitudes to you about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to repeal and replace Obamacare, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And at the end of the day, it's always somebody else's fault. By the way, I could use your $250 contribution to my campaign election fund. The Treasury of the United States, quite frankly, is insolvent. Nobody will admit it, but it is. Except for the notion that money changers of the world have laid claim to the natural resources of America and upon the people themselves obligating their future earnings. That's why we have Federal Reserve notes. How many of you own a house? Okay. How many of you have a mortgage? At the top of that mortgage it says what? Mortgage note. Mortgage is an evidence of debt, not an evidence of ownership. The deed is the evidence of ownership. So while some may disagree with me, I hold that Congress has maintained some of its responsibility under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution to the U.S. Treasury acting as its agent. It's Congress that has the authority to coin money, a really good thing. And it is the responsibility of Congress to regulate the value thereof. And it is Congress that permits the executive branch office to carry out the mechanics of coining money, coining honest money. However, through a number of legal gymnastics, in fact, the term you used, I love that. I'm going to have to try and really let that soak into my mind about, I'm going to have to revisit the term, quite frankly, when you were speaking to the items that we were voting on just a little while ago. However, through a number of legal gymnastics and most likely illegal and impermissible actions, it is Congress that has also abdicated its second responsibility, and that's to maintain the value of the coins that it's coined. My disdain for the Federal Reserve, and by the way, Larry looked at that word and he's like, wow, that's kind of strong. It's like, well, it's a lot less strong than the word I was going to use. My disdain for the Federal Reserve is a double word fail. Federal Reserve, and it's of epic proportions. It's beyond description, and I am certain that most, if not all of you here share my disgust of their naked robbery of the wealth of this nation since the first day of its existence. It's not federal, it's a private corporation. And it's not a reserve, because if you go to ask, what do I exchange for this note? They will look at you with a blank stare and say, nothing, except the full faith and credit of the federal government. In fact, Mr. Joe Cobb, I've referenced him before, he said it's nothing more than a unit of accounting measure. That's all it really is. And the Federal Reserve simply lets you pay your tax. It's a get out of jail free card, lets you pay your tax with Federal Reserve notes. So that helps to, and I'll revisit this again in a moment, it helps to give us the understanding of what money really is. It's facilitating the trade of commerce, of services, and of products from one person to another. That's it. From the people to the government, from the government to the people. It's a facilitator. So the issue of honest money actually is a civil rights issue. And I bet you never heard anyone say that before. And if you have, I'm sorry if I've stolen their thunder. As we were forming up this nation through the Revolutionary War, the idea of sovereignty of men was codified. How many attorneys are there in the room? I know of 2, 3. Okay. So you probably get this very clearly, that it is a civil rights issue. As we were forming up this nation through the Revolutionary War, the idea of sovereignty of men was codified. As Martin Armstrong put it, this fundamental change in the focus of rights of the monarch to that of the individual is reflected in Madison's report on the Virginia resolutions in 1800. It was the American Revolution that changed international law, establishing for the first time jurisdictional law predicated on human rights. It is the people who control their destiny and give power to the states, and then the states to the union of states. Thomas Jefferson is credited with saying, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless and content their fathers are homeless on the continent that their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from banks and resorted to the people whom it properly belongs. This goes back all the way to our understanding of federalism, of the supreme. In fact, I was talking to some of the folks downstairs. What's the supreme government? Ecclesia. God's government. That's the supreme government that is supposed to be controlling all other forms of government. So after a number of attempts by the Arizona legislature, and I need to depart from my remarks for just a moment and give credit to a fellow who has since passed. His name is Senator Crandall. Senator Crandall ran, I want to say 4 or 5 legal tender bills long before I arrived in the House. And he was making some progress. He was convincing people. And he died tragically in a ranching accident a couple of years ago before he had the opportunity to see this bill. So he really set, and we were good friends, he really set the tone for the movement of a legal tender bill to move its way through the Arizona legislature. But after a number of attempts by the legislature to align our law with the Treasury of the United States law, by recognizing constitutionally authorized coin, honest money, and real property as legal tender for all debts public and private in Arizona, we finally moved a bill through to law. So why do I call coin money real money? And this is a concept that not a lot of people get. Real property, real estate. If you think about money, gold and silver, it is refined earth. It's real property that comes out of the ground. It is portable, refined, highly valued real estate. There's a unique concept. It's real, it's not personal property. Okay, now that turns the whole idea of money upside down and on its head. Because that means that you are now using something that is honest value, not something that has invented value. It seems simple enough that each state, as a sovereign with retained rights to acknowledge or disavow actions of Congress and the federal executive, should be able to act to adopt enabling legislation. Unfortunately not. And that is the curious matter for which broader discussion around real currency versus fiat currency should exist. And I have to also credit Mr. Tom Selgas. Is Tom a member of the board of UPMA? Tom Selgas? Is he a member of the board of UPMA?
Tom.
Selgas.
Yes.
Okay. My hat's off to you, Tom. If you haven't seen this thing that he has distributed called Egonomics, you really need to Google it and take a look. So, I don't remember the year, I think it was 1910. An ounce of silver would have bought you 30,000 eggs. Not that you would want to buy 30,000 eggs, but you could also buy a suit, a men's suit, very nice men's suit, with a $20 gold piece. Guess what a nice men's suit costs today? 1,200 Federal Reserve notes. And if you were to go out to any particular website that wants to report on the value of gold, it's somewhere between $1,200 and $1,300 Federal Reserve notes, which is equal to 1 ounce of gold. So isn't it interesting that over 100 years ago, you could buy a men's suit for 1 ounce of gold, and you can buy it today for 1 ounce of gold. So when you have a state treasurer, Representative Ivory, who comes up to you and says, Federal Reserve or gold is too volatile, I would probably point to that fact and say, well, please explain to me then how the volatility of the Federal Reserve note has replaced the involatility of the cost of a suit. You can't answer the question, I'm relatively sure. So House Bill 2014-17 was the bill that I ran, which was successful in making it all the way through 31, 16, and 1. 31 votes in the House, 16 in the Senate, and the signature of the governor makes things law. In HB 2014, we spent after capital gains, we went after capital gains taxation laid upon exchanges of one type of currency for another. Now, to give you a little bit of history about prior bills, they simply were adopting federal law as state law, which again, as I said, seems to be an easy enough thing, because just because it's federal law doesn't mean it's actually in the state, for example, Arizona revised statutes. What we're trying to do is simply align ourselves with the federal treasury. Apparently, folks found that objectionable. Interesting thing. So we decided to go after something that is even more insidious, and that is capital gains on the exchange of one type of currency for another. So for all this time in the federal government, when you exchange a $20 gold piece for Federal Reserve notes, there's a claim that if you hold it for a year and then you sell it for 100 Federal Reserve notes more, you sell it, they use the term sell, that you've experienced a capital gain of $100. Well, actually, they're taxing inflation. It's not a gain. So let me get this straight. You're going to tax a loss as though it's a gain on something that you don't have legislative authority to tax. You have IRS rule that allows you to tax inflation as a gain. There's a real problem with that. So really what we decided to do is go after the exchange of one specie for another. And in this law, what we did is we put into it specie. The term specie wasn't in Arizona law prior to that. So specie could be anything that we attach value to. So it could be a 1 ounce, 0.999 silver round. It could be a Morgan silver dollar. It could be a silver eagle, a golden eagle, a libertad. It is a specie, each specie unto itself. And the exchange of that money, particularly U.S. currency, excuse me, does not give rise, in Arizona anyhow, to a capital gain or a capital loss. It is simply an exchange of currency, one type for another. So the reason I bring that up is if you were to take a $10 bill and I would exchange that with you for 10 $1 bills, there's no tax assigned to that, right? And there's no tax assigned to that exchange back. So why then would there be a tax assigned to money that is real money versus fiat currency? And it's my understanding that the U.S. Treasurer has started to take interest in this because it has kind of pulled the tarp back on a very serious problem that the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury have. So it's important to note that the Arizona Department of Revenue has expressed the notion that money belongs to the government and is on loan to the people. Yes, they actually said that. Not on the record, of course, but in a conversation. And what really caught my attention was the legislative liaison when we were trying to talk about gold bonds and how the state might play in that and legal tender bill and capital gains. He said, well, what happens if I were to go to a hardware store and buy a lawnmower today on the first day of the month for $1,000 worth of silver And at the end of the month, the hardware store pays their taxes, and they pay taxes on that $1,000, but it's now worth $1,400. Are they not going to pay tax on the $400 increase? Because I swear he said this. What about the unjust gain? I'm sorry, what? The unjust gain, because he held on to the money long past the date of the sale. And I said, well, quite frankly, what would you do if the US dollar lost money? Would he expect to pay less tax? Boom. Yeah. I'll get back to you on that. So in reality, money belongs to God, and we are called to be stewards of it, and it is to be used for His purpose through us. And I think in this gathering, I think that resonates with you. Not everybody in this world sees it that way. But at the end of the day, the value is assigned by us. We are the government. In fact, in the Supreme Court decision, IRDC versus State or Arizona legislature, the Supreme Court came out and basically said, the people are the legislature. That's kind of a cool idea. Now, they didn't go as far as to say that we're a true democracy, thank God, but they did reinforce the idea that the people retain the power, and they are the ones who give government the power. So our solution, with the help of people like my good friend Mr. Hilton, with Dr. Keith Weiner, I don't know if Keith is a board member or considering being a board member. Good brain trust there. Highly recommend him if he is under consideration. And my very good Reagan era friend Joe Cobb, we developed language that specifically identified the reported capital gain or capital loss as related to federal income tax, and the filing as it flows into the state of Arizona Department of Revenue. We simply amended Arizona revised statute to say we're not charging anything related to that, whether it's capital gain or capital loss. If it's a specie exchange, it's not taxable in the state of Arizona. So at least we've taken the step of removing that from the state level. Now, if someday we could get a number of states to do that, I would love it, because then the federal government would have to start paying attention to that notion, and we might actually drive state-borne solutions to the federal government. I think that's how this is supposed to work. So the fundamental function of money is to facilitate the exchange of goods and services for valuable consideration. And a Federal Reserve note is no more money than a mortgage note, as I mentioned before. It is really evidence of debt, nothing more, nothing less. It is a powerful demonstration to set 1 ounce of gold next to 12, and then at the time it was 1,286 $1 bills. That was the presentation that we made in front of the Senate Banking Committee. And to a member, they did not understand the volatility of the paper money, the paper notes, until they saw the idea that the Federal Reserve note is tied to the amount of debt that the United States government takes on. The gold is not. And I think that made significant, if you were going to campaign this philosophy to other states, that was a very important move in testimony. And then I'll speak to Dr. Ron Paul in a minute. Dr. Paul looked at it and he said, "You're exactly right, man. That's exactly what's going on." So when 286 of the Federal Reserve notes, say you get an ounce of gold today for $1,200 and tomorrow it's $1,286, Federal Reserve, 286 of those notes are actually a reduction in the power to purchase. It costs more to purchase anything from a cart to groceries. That's why today, I remember when I was a kid, $50 would fill a grocery cart. Today, you're lucky to get milk, eggs, bread, and maybe some meat. Maybe. Excuse me. So as the first primary sponsor of HB 2014-17, I had the good fortune to catch the attention of Dr. Ron Paul. In fact, I was delighted to have Dr. Paul fly into Phoenix. Thank you very much, Larry. Excuse me. Fly into Phoenix the night before the Senate hearing, and we had a great conversation on. He flew in to be an advocate of my bill, read through it, called me on the phone a couple times, said, look, I want to make sure that this is exactly what, I want to make sure I've got clarity on what you're doing here. And as I walked him through the bill, he got even more excited and said, I will be there to advocate for your bill. In fact, started to make phone calls to every one of the legislators, contacted the governor's office, contacted the, as I understand, state treasurer as well. And during the conversation over dinner, he also brought up the idea of competitive currency. And he said, look, you know, with the introduction of blockchain technology, with a public ledger, with honest money that is relatable to everything from Bitcoin to ethereal, there's got to be a dozen of these things out there now. People that are using a currency to transact business. They're not banks, they're associations. They're cooperatives. They're groups of people who have banded together to say, listen, you've got something of value, I've got something you are willing to accept in exchange. Commerce happens. It's not something that has to be dictated by a central bank or by a central planning agency or by the White House or Congress or even the state legislature. This is a private matter between two parties. So, I'm going to finish here because I don't want to be a typical politician and just talk on and on. UPMA is doing valuable work to restore the exchange of real money for goods and services and to place what once was off limits, fractional banking profits, say that twice if you can, fractional banking profits in the hands of so-called Federal Reserve. And I'm talking about the real reserve, not the fake reserve that is claimed by in the name of the Federal Reserve. What I'm talking about is it's interesting to note that the rejection of the one world government, which seems to be on everybody's tongues these days, some of the more vocal opponents do not realize that at one time we had a de facto one world currency. It was gold. It was silver. An ounce of gold carried with it the same purchasing power around the world no matter where you went. And it didn't really matter what government had put their stamp on it until such time that they began to minimize the precious metal content. If you want proof of that, just look up Rome. Didn't end for them so well when they started to remove precious metal and replace it with base metal replacement. Got to the point where they actually took the coins of the day and dipped them in silver. That's as much silver as they had, and one of the ways that they could figure out whether or not it was legitimate is rub it with a little bit of sand. And you could see, oh, that's really copper. Yeah. So, beg pardon?
So the Romans did that first?
Yeah. So whether it is associations with gold and silver deposits, the process, the transfer of real money, or blockchain technology that facilitates the ebb and flow of real accounting, or real wealth accounting, I predict that the days of centralized banking are numbered. The days of Federal Reserve Bank as we know it and its artificial controls over interest and inflation will come to an end when honest money pushes 51% of fiat currency that is currently in circulation out of the marketplace. Honest money will push less than honest money out of the marketplace as people begin to accept it. And by the way, that's one of the things I have to do before I leave Salt Lake City is open my account here, so I need to make sure that I get off the podium quickly. Community banks and depository associations like UPMA will provide sustainable value to communities throughout America. In fact, supporting state-born solutions like Arizona's legal tender bill, legislators who are willing to move these bills and governors who are willing to adopt them and sign the policy positions of real money as a competitive currency will result in resilient economies. And keep in mind that when we have resilient local economies, our entire nation is stronger. That's how we were built. We didn't have these massive public school systems, for example, We had community schools, we had community banks, we had community businesses, and that is what caused America to be that resilient nation that we once were. Now we're on our way back there, but I think our experimentation with central planning has proven that's not the direction we need to go. So many people talk about economic development. UPMA is making economic development happen. So what is money? I've already covered that. I'm going to skip on. Honest money, gold and silver, are refined real estate. And I want to leave you with that thought. You are carrying around real property. I carry this so that I will never forget. This is the real money, not the foldable paper that's in my wallet. So I'm also excited to hear that other western states, including Wyoming, yay Wyoming, and organizations like Campaign for Liberty are working to present legal tender legislation similar to what we passed in Arizona. As the Arizona bill made its way through the legislative process, I received many calls from legislators around the West, mainly to understand the argument that exchanges of one currency for another should not be taxable. And the taxation of the so-called capital gain or silver and gold exchanges was really a tax on inflation, not a loss. So from acorns grow mighty oaks. I'm also excited to see UPMA open the first new private U.S. precious metals depository in over 80 years in the United States. Conditions are ripe for what Dr. Ron Paul calls a competitive currency environment, and the movement towards honest money use for everyday commerce is within our grasp. In fact, it's happening for some people today. And I would like to propose the expansion of UPMA because it's better than a bank. So, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your indulgence.
The audit, thank you. Tim Dumoulin is our board of director meeting. He went with us to audit the holdings in the accounts, or in the vault. And so I'd like him to present that.
So yesterday I audited all the gold, buffalo, and the eagles and the silver eagles that were at the vault, the Brinks account. And so it was a full physical audit. We just confirmed that everything is there, everything matches up. I don't think things move in and out of that place on a regular basis, so essentially it's there. And we have our own little place that's just for us at UPMA. Yes.
Now, is that vault currently in this building, or is it still in Salt Lake?
No, I'm talking about the Salt Lake vault.
But I understand it's going to eventually be in this building, am I correct?
I can speak to that if you'd like.
This is good.
Test. Is that
Yeah.
it?
Okay.
So why don't you just make your report one more time at the mic?
Okay.
I can speak to the vault here.
Okay.
After you're done with that.
Okay. Yeah, so once again, I was part of a team that audited the physical gold and silver in the Brinks vault in Salt Lake. And everything matched exactly. And just so you know, that is where the bulk of the holdings is there, by a large percentage. And so it was a perfect audit in that regard. And Abe, I'll turn this over to you to talk about the rest of it, plus the vault here. Sorry.
And I'll have Larry speak to this a little bit more, as well as giving a plan for what Legal Tender Services is going to do with the vault that is here. at their facilities. But we do have some gold and silver here already deposited, and I went with the staff of Legal Tender Services to go down and count and audit the gold and silver coins that are deposited here. And they did appear to be there. There was some accounting on some of the junk silver that appeared to be a lot more than what was on the books, and there's a little bit of a slush fund in there, and I think we will be doing a hand fine count of all that and get that sorted out. But so there is more than what is on the books, so that's a good thing. And and then also there's an incoming and outgoing that I went over with Chris Jensen, who's the accountant on the staff, and everything is consistent with the records. So I thought it was a great audit, and it's an amazing process that we have, and it's one of a kind, and it's a world of difference than the system we have and banks. So with that, I'd like to also, is there some presentations that we wanted to have with Chris?
Those will be in the board meeting.
Those will be in the board meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
I think the member meetings.
Okay, so is there any other items of business that the members would like to bring up at this time before we conclude this meeting?
I wanted to ask a question about, there's a lot of information on the internet about Trump taking the dollar back to gold,
Okay.
being backed by gold. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you think that's going to happen?
So the question is Trump advocating that we go back to a gold-based dollar? Larry, do you want to see if you can answer that question?
Images of President Trump's Trump Tower apartment will know that he likes gold. And actually, representing UPMA, as general counsel for UPMA, we have sent an official request to the Department of the Treasury that they take some specific steps to move toward the use and greater recognition of the gold and the silver dollar, which already are U.S. currency. But we have proposed some particular measures that could be taken to strengthen the U.S. currency by highlighting the fact that we actually do have a number of different forms of currency, and recognizing that the gold dollar, the silver dollar, the paper dollar, and the platinum dollar are all currency of the United States, but they have different purchasing power in the marketplace. So rather than trying to pretend that they're all just one thing, and that there's a lot of advantage that could accrue to the monetary system of the United States and to individuals as well, by simply recognizing that we essentially do have, thanks to the Reagan administration, 4 separate forms of currency in the United States. And so that's where we're hoping the dialogue will go. We hope that if we get past that initial step, we might be able to start talking about gold bonds, which is a whole nother topic. We could spend a couple hours on that, but there's some real potential there in terms of kind of getting our fiscal ship in order. And so the UPMA is working on those initiatives and has been communicating with the Department of Treasury on that. We don't have a meeting set up yet. We're hoping that that'll occur sometime in the coming year. But I think, you know, as they kind of get their feet, we do have some allies that are that have been placed into the Trump administration that have direct relationships with many of us here in the UPMA. So we're going to hope to kind of leverage those a little bit. We have a good congressional delegation from Utah. Mike Lee, I think, is probably one that has some of the deepest understanding of these issues. I mean, back in 2011, when we passed the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act, he came out and proposed companion legislation at the federal level within, I think it was within a month after the passage. Now, no surprise, it didn't make much progress under the Obama administration, but he has deep understanding. I think as members, if you would reach out to your elected representatives and say that you'd like to see these reforms really move forward in a meaningful way, I think that we have a really important window of opportunity right now. So I encourage you to do that. Good question. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other questions or issues that the members want to bring up this time? Yes.
I have two.
Okay.
If I have a friend who's a resident of Canada and they want to send and have a UPMA account, can they have an account with UPMA, or do you have to be a United States citizen to have an account?
Okay, the question is, can people outside the United States have a UPMA account? That is a legal question that I am not aware. Is it? Do you want to address that one as well? And then he has another comment.
We have had interest from people outside the United States in participating with us. The program is primarily designed for U.S. residents. It's built on U.S. legal tender. But as far as those inquiries, we can certainly vault for them. As far as some of the transactional issues, we're still studying that in terms of how that kind of structure would work. I'm in discussions with special counsel on that, and so I guess the answer is yes, in the sense that they can certainly vault with us, but in terms of some of the other programs that we have, we're still looking into that.
So UPMA will help convert Canadian dollars into U.S. gold dollars.
If the funds can be transferred into a U.S. bank using a SWIFT code, then we can work with them. So that's kind of what we've been looking at. We've been looking at some other kinds of approaches in accepting other forms of currency. We're even looking at, a little spoiler, Bitcoin, accepting that for deposits. So that's kind of part of an ongoing project right now. So I couldn't say that we have a definitive answer for you on that, but it's definitely on our radar, and it's something that we're looking at, and that the programmers are putting together some things on that. And Paul, do you want to come up and do you have a question or an answer to the question? Why don't you come up and
Right now, the infrastructure is converting one form of U.S. tender for another, right? So on the process of getting the Canadian dollars right now into a U.S. bank, that conversion happens at the bank level, and then it's remitted over as U.S. currency into gold, and so the deposits here are gold. So there's no current infrastructure that allows for other conversions other than legal tender within the U.S. system.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for making that clarification, Phil.
I think that gold and silver as a medium of exchange, U.S. Gold dollars, and bitcoins as maybe a comparable thing. The challenge is getting organizations, businesses to accept those as payment.
Mm-hmm.
How are we progressing in getting more merchants and more services to be available through UPMA?
Okay, so the question, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the question. The question is, how are we progressing on getting more businesses to accept gold and silver dollars for payment for goods and services? So essentially within our co-op, within our association, we are fully authorized by law to exchange any form of legal tender for goods and services that are provided by other members. So, and that occurs with a fair degree of regularity. We did have at one point a kind of prototype web app that facilitated that. That has been kind of mothballed for the time being, but we're actually right in the process now of developing capabilities that will restore that into the web app that we have for members. Right now, if members want to exchange their holdings for goods and services with other members, they simply need to call in to the Legal Tender Services staff. And Chris, do you want to explain how that kind of a transaction would work, so that people can know this is kind of what we're doing for now until we get our automated system.
All right, so the way that transaction works, we mark it as a transaction that is for goods or services. There's a 1% transaction fee that happens, and it goes from the buyer's account to the seller's account as a form of payment. I don't know what else you would want to go into detail on.
Well, maybe you can just mention how that's been kind of automated internally, so it's a lot easier for you to do that transaction than it was previously.
Yeah, sure. With a lot of the developments that we have internally, we have an automated system that we can receive those and input it into our system and execute that transaction, whereas we used to have to do it manually. So, yeah.
That's a step.
That's
a step towards.
It's a huge step towards that.
Can I ask some logistical questions?
Sure.
On that then? So essentially you're electronically transferring what would be in the vault, right? So you've got something in the vault would be allocated with member A's name, and they issue a transaction, and now it's allocated to, some portion of that is allocated to member B based on the transaction, good or service, right?
Correct. So it works the way like a book entry of,
Right.
instead of having Bob's name on it, now it has
Right. And so
Joe's
then
name on
how
it.
is that
Correct.
backed up, secured, audited, so that, you know, that record is protected from, cyber attack, backed up, those sorts of things. How is that logistically taking place?
Sure. So we have physical records that we print out daily of everybody's their holdings. So even if for, I don't know, all of the ways that it could happen, but if our system were wiped, we would have a record of who owned what at any given time. And those are kept in a secure location. Also, there's physical records of any transaction that happens from one person to another, or exchanges out from one currency to another, or redemptions that way. So there's always a duality of a physical record as well as an electronic record that's within our database. If one or the other were corrupted, then we would have a fallback.
And then internal audit, is there a kind of a too deep system on transfers in terms of checkoffs, so that an entry couldn't just be changed by one person going rogue? Is there anything like that in place?
Yeah, it's probably 3 deep, like Larry says. So any change is earmarked with a stamp of which user could have done that. But there's also
About the escrow kind of checks and those kinds of.
right, yeah. All of the movement of funds from one currency to another or within the accounts has to pass through our escrow agent. So there are several steps of checkoffs, which sometimes slows down the process a little bit, but makes it the most secure. So our escrow agent will sign off on that before anything can move. So if anything moves without that approval, it's immediately flagged in our system so that we can know that. Sure.
Well, I was just gonna say we have my son here. He's 15, deposits money once in a while. He's probably the youngest UPMA member. Yeah, because his dad's the board of directors. But he came and he deposited some money and he signed the paper, I signed the paper, and somebody else from UPMA, you know, there was 3 of us that witnessed it. And then he noticed in his account for a long time it hadn't been deposited. And so I got the physical paper out and I said, hey, look, you guys haven't deposited the money into his account. And so there was enough record and enough witnesses, and they were able to correct the mistake. So there's plenty of safeguards along the way to make sure that the money is where it needs to go. So that's our personal experience. So.
There you go. Anything? Yeah.
That kind of leads into the second question that I had that I wanted to ask. If you know, I've got kids, but they're minors. Can minors have an account with UPMA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Right now, that's a possibility. They would have to open their own account, and it would be subject to its own account fees. But there are developments, as I understand, there are developments of having associated beneficiaries and things that are tied into your account, where you can appropriate those funds under as kind of sub-accounts, kind of the way that a credit union will work with sub-accounts underneath your own that are subject to just one membership fee and one vaulting fee instead of having several. That's my understanding. Is that on par?
Okay, thank you.
Great.
We're going to close the, if there's not, is there, I guess I'll look around if there's any more questions or comments or issues. All right, we're going to close the regular member meeting, and then we're going to have the board of directors who are here to stay after, and we'll have a board of directors meeting, and we'll be discussing all the things that we need to discuss at that time. So thank you for coming.